Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel, Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have my What I Read in October video for you. You're going to notice right away that my TBR from October changed a little bit, and you'll recognize a lot of the books in this video, but some did not make it into this video because I didn't have a chance to read it, and then there are a couple books that I originally wasn't planning on reading this month that did end up in this video. I honestly had a crazy busy October between Halloween and harvest stuff and adopting 2 rabbits, working overtime, family stuff, friend stuff. It was a lot. I did manage to read 13 books for this month, which I was happy about. Partially I did it to offset some of the busyness that was going on, because reading is an awesome stress reliever for me, so I managed to get through some. But before this video gets too long, let's just dive right into it. I'm not going to talk about every single book that I read, but I'll try my best to cover most of what I read. And let's actually start with my favorite of the month. So the first book I want to talk about is The Holo Places by T. Kingfisher, and this was my favorite story of the month. On my channel, one of my earlier videos I ended up doing was reviewing The Twisted Ones by this author. I had really enjoyed The Twisted Ones. I thought it was very funny, clever at times. It had a unique narrative, had some creepy imagery and elements, and overall I thought it was a very fun book. So I was very interested to pick this one up by the same author, and I pre-ordered it, and it showed up on the day it came out, and I was so excited. So I just dove right into it because it happened to get shipped on my day off, and I read it in one day. I really enjoyed this story. I do want to mention that it's not really a particularly scary story, so if you're looking for something that's very scary, kind of a nail biter, oh my gosh, there's a lot of dread and absolute terror, this may not be the book for you, because I think the narration style is very humorous and clever, but it kind of, I think, dilutes the scariness a little bit. But if you like weird fiction, just very creative stories, dark fantasy, and some horror elements and some creepy and eerie imagery, this one is a very, very good one for that. So I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was super enjoyable, loved it very much, and really this book I think will appeal to a lot of different people. Just don't get disappointed if you're looking for something that's truly horrific. This one, the premise is pretty simple, straightforward. We have or initially is anyway, we have a woman named Kara who goes by Carrot to her family and friends. It's kind of a funny nickname. She goes through a divorce, and she ends up moving in with her uncle, who runs this kind of taxidermy oddities museum. And at some point after being there for a month or so, she ends up taking over the museum for a couple of weeks because her uncle needs to have some knee surgery because he's dealing with a lot of pain. So while he's out, she's managing the museum. One day she discovers there's a hole in the wall of her museum and decides she wants to investigate. So she gets her friend Simon, who works in the coffee shop in the same building, to help her investigate. They go through the portal and realize that this is not a part of the building. This is a completely new world, and the story goes from there. I don't want to spoil anything more, because once you figure out what's happening, it's really cool. And it's basically, the story is kind of a retelling of The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, which is a short story that I happen to have read over the summer. So you don't have to have read The Willows to enjoy this book. If you have read The Willows, you will pick up on some references. There are definitely quite a few references to The Willows in this book. Kind of like how in The Twisted Ones there are some references to The White People by, I think, Arthur Machen, I think, if I remember correctly. I'll put it below if I'm incorrect. So definitely give this one a chance. I think you will really like it. Just know it's not particularly horrifying, but it's a worth its story, in my opinion. I did really like it a lot and had so much fun, and I would definitely reread this even after I know how the story ends. I still think it's enjoyable enough that I will definitely pick this up at some point. I think my least favorite book of the month was The Return by Rachel Harrison. I knew this was I was taking a chance on this book because I had already seen some of the preliminary reviews and kind of saw what the Goodreads rating was, but I like to give books a chance, and I like to stay open-minded with books. So I read this one, and I kind of see why it has a lower rating. It wasn't the worst book I've read, and I think there are a few redeeming qualities to it if you're the right reader. But for me, especially the ending and the fact that for me there was no reveal, there wasn't really a twist at all, and that was a really big letdown for me. I went through this whole book only to find basically what happened. And I think it spends way too much time on the friend dynamics, which could be cool, but it just seemed like it was just dragging on and the pacing was completely off. The setting was pretty interesting. So basically this book, it takes place at a hotel. There are 4 friends who meet up at this like very kind of quirky, kitschy kind of hotel in like the middle of nowhere, and they are regrouping after one of their friends has been gone for 2 years. And when she shows up, there's clearly something wrong with her, and then the friends are trying to figure out what to do. And I really think that the friend, like, it was just very repetitive, where there are just so many scenes after scenes of the friends being like, there's something wrong with Julie, what should we do? And then, oh, well, we shouldn't bring anything up because we don't want to hurt her feelings. Oh, but there's something really wrong with her, and back and forth, back and forth. And I feel like that could have been condensed. Like, it was interesting to explore, but it kept happening, and, you know, that was unfortunate. And again, I just feel like with this kind of story, it needed more of an oomph in the last portion of it. There was one scene towards the end that I thought was really well done and very creepy. Like, it gave me like some shivers reading this one scene. So there is a good scene in this that is creepy and well done. I wish the rest of the book was like that, because unfortunately this was a letdown and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Definitely wish that it was a little bit better, but you know, it was pretty unsatisfying, unfortunately, and I really tried to give it as much of a chance as possible, but there's just something about it. But who knows, maybe the author will take what she did with the story and write another spooky tale, but with more power to it and with better plot and pacing where things are really happening. And, you know, especially if she took that one scene that she wrote and made an entire book just like that, with that same atmosphere, same sense of dread, and same horror, it would be cool. So, fortunately, this is not great, and I would recommend a bunch of other horror stories or mysteries or thrillers for you to read over this one. Next book I want to talk about is actually a short story collection, and it's Dead Leaves by Keelan Patrick Burke. I left this one for right before Halloween, and I'm glad I did, because there are 9 stories in this collection, and there are a couple that don't directly deal with Halloween, but all of them have either a fall atmosphere or sort of deal with Halloween, or at least deal with fall, or at least something that's very horrific happening. So I do recommend checking this collection out. Some of the stories are better than others, but that's basically with every single short story collection. There are very few short story collections where I liked every single story equally, or like gave every single story 5 out of 5 stars. It's just tough because you get attached to one awesome story and then you move on to another one and then you're not into it as much. So I think this was a pretty solid collection. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Really liked it. There are, I mean, if you really are looking for something very autumnal and give you that Halloween atmosphere, these are good story collections. I mean, Keelan Patrick Burke is a fantastic horror author. I've loved his full-length novel, I loved his novellas, and his short stories are very good too. So definitely pick these up. I'm not going to go in depth onto each of the short stories, but just know it's a pretty solid collection. I think there are only 1 or 2 stories I didn't care for in this whole collection, and the rest I really did like, and there was one in particular that was super awesome. So pick this one up. In fact, if you're still in the mood, even though it's November now, you can always read fall stuff well into November and even early December, I think, anyway. So give this one a chance if you'd like. this next one is a new release, and I ended up giving it 4.25 out of 5 stars, and that is None Shall Sleep by Ellie Marney. This one, I can describe it as sort of a young adult Silence of the Lambs with some unique elements to it, but pretty much in this story we follow our two main characters. One is 17, turning 18, and then the other, I think he's 19. One is training to basically eventually be an FBI agent, and the other survived a serial killer. And they are both chosen to, because they are very young, to try and talk to teenage serial killers in prison by the FBI. They're trying to do this sort of like very discreet, sort of obscure program that isn't well known because they don't necessarily want to advertise that they're hiring teenagers to work for them. But they're trying to get the teens to get the teenage serial killers to open up. And they think it's going to tie into a current serial killer case that is happening where the people, they're all teens, are found drained of their blood and just discarded in the trash or in other weird places. This one was pretty well done. I really enjoyed it. It was a great thriller to read for the month of October. I happen to really like Silence of the Lambs and definitely enjoyed this story. I do recommend kind of putting aside the idea that this couldn't happen. Like, it's not the most realistic story. So if you're really hung up on certain elements of it, like, just definitely suspend your disbelief in order to enjoy this, I think. Because at first I was sort of like, this doesn't seem like they would actually do this. But I just was like, you know what, it's fiction. I'm just going to enjoy the characters and this setting and setup for what it is. And once I started doing that, I did enjoy this quite a bit. And it's pretty straightforward, very simple writing style, but that's okay. It kind of fits the story. Like, it just, you're really focusing on the plot and putting the pieces of the puzzle together, and you know, I really liked it. It's also told in third person, so you get multiple perspectives and things happening, and it's pretty intense for a young adult book. So it's one I do recommend, and it's one of the better YA thriller books out there, I would say. So definitely give this one a shot if you are looking for a YA thriller or something that's kind of like a retelling of The Silence of the Lambs. This next one's going to be a fairly controversial opinion, and I'm not saying I disliked this book, but I was a bit let down, and that is Hell House by Richard Matheson. And I know a lot of horror fans are like, their jaws are dropped and like, what? You didn't like this book? It was okay. I have my Goodreads listed below, so you can go check that out for a full review of what I thought about this. But for me, it was like a between 3 and 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is kind of an average rating. Like 3 out of 5 for me is just sort of an average book. And I felt like this was kind of an average story because what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it averaged out to just be an okay book. So, Hell House, I've read Richard Matheson's work before. Really like I Am Legend, and really liked his short story collection, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Very solid stories. Really enjoyed that collection quite a bit. So, going into this, I thought I would really like it, and it was just okay. Premise of this is there are 4 people who are spending the night in a, well, not spending the night, but spending several nights in this very haunted house, which is basically the Everest of haunted houses, is how it's described. And they are either trying to prove or disprove the existence of ghosts and spirits and all of that to this one rich guy who promises to give them a bunch of money if they can do that. And you've got a science character, and you've got sort of a religious, spiritual character, and then you have a psychic character, and then you have the scientist's wife. And interesting setup, and you know, good atmosphere, and there were definitely some creepy scenes to it, but a lot of this book did feel sort of repetitive. Like, there's a lot of fainting happening and people passing out and just happening a bunch, and there was just way too much reliance on shock. So I tend to like sense of dread, psychological horror, feeling creeped out, and eerie things happening, and this was just basically like sexual assault after sexual assault, so trigger warning for sure. And for me, that's not scary. That's just kind of like, you know, okay, whatever. There's just way too much focus on that. There's like, I don't know what it was, but I think it's because the main supposedly ghost guy who's supposed to be haunting this, his backstory is that he's basically like a sex fiend. So, but I think it would be a huge shocker in the 70s when this came out. This came out in like 71 if I remember correctly, but nowadays it's sort of like, well, it's not really a shocker, and again, it's not something that personally scares me. So there were some elements of this that were great. I especially liked the dichotomy of the scientist and the religious spiritualist, because ultimately what I think this book is trying to say is that science can kind of be very dogmatic too, and that if those two characters had worked together, things may have been played out differently. So I liked that aspect a lot. I thought that was really interesting, and I liked the description of the house, but it's just not one of my new favorites. So unfortunately, again, it wasn't a bad book. I recommend maybe reading for one time, but for me it's just not a new favorite, unfortunately. There are actually 3 books that I'm about to share, and it's the Passage trilogy. So you have The Passage, The 12, and The City of Mirrors, all by Justin Cronin. So this kind of took up the bulk of my reading for this month, because I'd started this book in September and was finishing up in October, and then got to the other 2 books, and these are pretty big beasts, really, of books, and I really liked these. I wish I had read them sooner. I think it's because years ago, there's a couple of booktubers I really liked who rated these kind of low, and it put it so that I ended up ranking the books lower on my TBR, and I was just like, well, maybe I won't get to them as soon, and I wish I had. And I think part of it is that these books, they're kind of like Stephen King books, where there's a lot of setup, especially in this first book, and they are big books, and there's a lot of characters, and there is a lot happening, and the writing style, I think, for some readers who really like super fast-paced books and shorter books, they may have a tough time getting through these books, but I really liked them because I have a lot of patience for longer books. I love Stephen King. I don't mind if there's a bunch of setup for books, and the pacing didn't bother me too much. The second book of this trilogy, I think, dragged a little, but I still liked it. In fact, I thought it was even maybe a little bit darker than this one, and I love post-apocalyptic fiction and, you know, monsters and vampires, and I don't mind a wide cast of characters, so this series worked for me, and I did really like them. I can definitely see it not working for people, but it worked for me. Like, I enjoyed myself. I will probably purchase my own copy of this trilogy, and I liked the writing style, and I liked what the author was trying to say in some of the books. I thought that the trilogy ended really well. Gave it 5 out of 5 star for the third book, and you know, the middle was fine too. It sagged a little in my opinion, but I liked the whole trilogy and would recommend it for the right reader. So just know that they're longer books, and if you are looking for something that is extremely fast-paced, or like something you can just jump right into, or if you struggle with Stephen King's books, then you may not like these, but I think these are worth it if you like post-apocalyptic fiction or vampire, monster fiction. I mean, these were pretty fun books, so I'm definitely going to be doing a special review of the trilogy coming up very soon to give this series / trilogy justice, but definitely recommend them. Next book is The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. This one is kind of described as World War Z meets Stranger Things. I don't know if I would actually say I agree with the Stranger Things comparison per se, mainly because the kids in this are actually teenagers rather than middle schoolers or like early high school. They're, I think, either juniors or seniors. I think they're at least 16, 17, or 18, so they're a little bit older. And there's more mature elements to the book. So maybe I'd compare it more to like World War Z meets maybe certain elements of It. No, not even It. I'm not exactly sure what I would compare it to, but something with kids battling monsters, but they're older, they're teens. But I liked this one. When I first read it, I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. Now that I've had a little bit of time to think about it, it's not a perfect book, but I still had fun with it, especially because, like, I'm somebody who is not super techie. I'm always a little bit skeptical about new technological advances. I'm definitely somebody who, I'm not a complete Luddite, but I do have a lot of caution towards too much tech, especially weird stuff going in your body. And this book pretty much has to deal a lot with that. In this book, there is a small town that has a lab, basically, where a lot of people work at it, and there's this company, and they start doing implants into people, but something happens with those implants, and then all of a sudden, basically, most of the town is zombified, and these main characters who are teenagers who are just trying to fight to survive and figure out what's happening, and I liked it. There's definitely also, too, like, some kind of broadcast elements to the story as well, and, you know, it's not that long of a book, so if you're looking for something that's, like, very fast-paced, like, it pretty much, there's a little bit of setup, but then it jumps right into the story. It's only 303 pages, so very fun, and I think you'll probably like it. Just know it's not, you know, there were, like, 1 or 2, like, plot hole things that I caught that I wasn't sure about, and a few other things, but I thought it was fun. And some of the teen boy discussions are, like, pretty crude, but that's how a lot of teen boys are, so just know that, like, this is definitely a book for adults. It is not YA, so make sure if you are thinking of gifting this to a teenager, I would recommend them be probably at least 16 or 17 on the older end of books, because it definitely is more of an adult book and deals with mature stuff. So, other than that, give this one a chance. The next book is The House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. Ultimately, I liked aspects of this book, and it wasn't a bad book. It definitely has some very good atmosphere and really solid imagery and descriptions of this house and this town and these sisters and what's happening. I thought was really interesting. So in this book, it's basically a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses, but told much darker and more gothic. And I did like the gothic atmosphere. I thought it was well done. This takes place in a house by the sea, and all these sisters are starting to die mysteriously, and there is a lot happening, and there's a mysterious portal that leads to places where these sisters can go dance, and I don't know, it's pretty cool and interesting. I just felt like so the sisters are kind of difficult to keep track of, because they aren't, aside from, like, the main couple of sisters, the others, they aren't really well developed that much. Like, they're the little girls who are called the Graces, but they're kind of lumped in together, and then there were triplets, they're also lumped in together, and that was a little tricky to keep track of, as opposed to, like, if you have a wide cast of characters, but they're, like, very unique, it's easier to keep track of, but it was a bit much. And there were just a lot of things that didn't end up getting resolved in this story. Not going to go into spoiler territory, but I just was not satisfied with the ending. And I felt like there was too much time placed on describing some of the ballroom scenes, where I just want to know, like, who, you know, I'm more into, like, the murders and monsters and mysteries aspect of most books, and so some of the, like, oh, we're getting fancy shoes, or we're doing this, was a little much. And then there was a romantic subplot that was a little bit too big for me. Like, I think you could still have a romantic subplot, but it just kind of, at some point, was, like, taking over too much of the story. So, it's not, again, not bad. I am glad I read it. It was an enjoyable read for like maybe one time. I don't think I would probably read it again, but who knows, maybe in the future if I want to see if I change my mind, I might do that. So, you know, I guess it depends on what you want in the book. I think if you are a young adult fantasy reader or a young adult reader in general who isn't looking for I think maybe I wanted this to be too much of a horror story because some horror fans were recommending it to me, and that's why it wasn't a favorite of mine. But if you just happen to like retellings and fantasy and fairy tales and you like descriptions of balls and parties and that kind of thing, then this will probably be a good fit for you. But if you're looking for a horror story, this is not really horror. It has horror elements, but they're kind of overshadowed by other things that were happening. So just know that going into this book. So the last two books I'm going to just talk super quickly about. What October Brings, a Lovecraftian celebration of Halloween. This was my first time reading it this year, and I mentioned it in my October or / fall Halloween reads video that I uploaded a couple weeks ago. And overall, pretty good short story collection. Some stories were better than others, and as a whole the collection does get repetitive after a certain point, so I'd probably give it like 3 out of 5 stars. Did like it, and there were some awesome stories within this, so I do recommend giving it a chance for some of the earlier stories in particular. And there's one story towards the end I really liked as well. And also, there were some editing issues in a few of the stories, but I don't usually take that into account when I review a book because that's an editing problem and not a problem with the writers themselves. So, fun, Lovecraftian stories. I'm a big Lovecraft fan and cosmic horror fan, and this is just chock full of that. So, looking for some atmospheric Halloween reads that incorporate some Lovecraft. Check this one out. And Seeing Things by Sonora Taylor. Liked this novella quite a bit. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I actually kind of want to reread this in the summer because I actually think this would be a great summer novella because it does take place in the summer. And this is also a coming-of-age story, and it's a female-centric coming-of-age story, which is awesome because I'm always on the lookout for that because I just love coming-of-age stories in general. Most of my favorite coming-of-age stories are about boys, and I'm totally fine with that, but it's cool to also incorporate some girl coming-of-age stories too. And this is really about a girl trying to solve, like, she starts seeing ghosts and she ends up going to her uncle's for the summer and is still seeing things and is trying to figure out a bunch of stuff, not just about ghosts, but about life and herself in general. So, very fun read, and I do recommend it quite a bit. Part of me wishes this was a full-length book, but that's how I am with a lot of novellas, and I am very interested to see what Sonora Taylor writes in the future, and, you know, I think it's a very fun, awesome book, or novella. So, those were the books I read last month, and I have already started reading some books for November. I'll have my November TBR up in the next day or two, so stay out on the lookout for that. And I really want to start uploading more videos. I've just had so much craziness happening in my life, but things should be calming down probably after Thanksgiving, and then once that happens I'll have way more time to make more videos. So hang in there with me, guys, and I hope you are having an awesome November. Let me know what you're planning on reading for November. Let me know what you read for October, and if you read any of these books, what did you think of them? And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.